Jordan B. Sanders, and welcome to Trygil's Tips, Trick, and Talk, episode number 2. So, back again, episode number 2. What am I going to do this time? I would like to do some tips and tricks, but I don't think that's really feasible given my current circumstances. What you see behind me, this is the space that I'm working with, so I think for the first few weeks until we get fully moved into our new space that I'm just going to be doing a lot of talking about things, kind of things that I've talked to myself a lot about. I've talked to the Hammer K a lot about things that that may not be general knowledge about Order of Tyr, some inner Order of Tyr doings and stuff that we want to be public knowledge and we hope is public knowledge, but we haven't had a really good forum to communicate that, and I think this is a good way to do that. So right now what I'm going to do for this episode of Quadruple T is kind of give you guys some ideas on or kind of explain the story behind our first album, The Wizard's War, how that kind of came to be, and what the sort of future of that story is. Seeing as how Flames of Destiny is sort of a break from that, it's kind of its own thing separate from it. So The Wizard's War is basically straight up power metal album, and the lyrics are very fantasy based, very nerdy, you know, that kind of thing. When I wrote the story, I wanted to try to give some sort of realism to it, so most of the characters' names in the story were chosen, not first and last names together, but the individual names, and then I kind of paired them together. Each of the individual names are real names. For example, Vortigern Trygil, Aldrich Daghelm, King Beardolf, King Sigmund. Those are all real names from medieval history. I found them on a list of basically lineage site of people that lived during medieval times. Medieval times. Seriously, so I thought that was pretty cool. They're different, definitely different names, not exactly entirely names you would see today. Maybe with the exception of Sigmund. But there is one character in the story whose name is not period accurate, as it were. It's Drogo Zimar, or Tsimar, and actually he only gets mentioned by name, I think only in the outro voiceover. I know he gets mentioned, and he may get mentioned once in the last song, The Final Battle Cry. Maybe. I know he's referenced in that song. Whether or not he's mentioned by name, it slips my mind at the moment. But I kind of want to give you the story that went on there, just to make it more clear, because the lyrics kind of leave some things out, things that are actually much more well fleshed out in my mind. And the story itself for the album is really just a small segment of a much larger story. My intention when writing it was that we were going to have you know, a series of albums, and we were going to be able to each album tell a piece of this story until ultimately we had told the whole story, and so you understood everything that happened, not only in the first album but from there on, and not only that but also before the first album, because it's sort of an in media res sort of thing, where you're kind of in the middle of the story when you first come in The Wizard's War. The first couple lines in The Evil Wizards Arise, it explains very little, but I mean it gives you enough to kind of give you a bearing, and then it just starts telling the story like immediately, just right on it. And so that's I did that intentionally, because I always had this intention of going in and kind of filling out the rest of the story, kind of, you know, fleshing it out and making it more detailed and real feeling than it is alone. And so so to sort of give you a little bit of backstory on the lyrical premise for The Wizard's War, there is the main kingdom that it's centered around, and it's called Daile Roith. And all these names I probably have already seen, but I'll try to give some, you know, titles on over my face or somewhere around here to kind of show you how it's spelled, so that you get an idea of the spelling versus the way that I pronounce it. And the way that I pronounce it is just how I pronounce it in my head. It's not necessarily a definitive way to pronounce these names, but it's how I call them. So Daile Roith is this kingdom, and it's led by a man, King Beowulf. And the way that the kingdom's set up is there's basically two hierarchies that support the entire kingdom. One is purely defense, and one is almost purely service, but it's also defense too, and when there is great need. So the defense side of it is basically knights, right? So you have your just traditional guys in armor going out and with swords and kicking butt. So there's a whole hierarchy of knights, and the head of that hierarchy is the one who reports directly to Beowulf, and his position is called First Knight, and his name is Aldrich Dakelm. He's basically like a general for the army. He advises Beowulf on tactical issues, things like that. This is very detailed and not necessarily extremely relevant, but I have it very detailed in my mind. So he basically leads this army. And the other side, the sort of service support for the kingdom, is actually led by a group of people who I kind of call mage folk. Like classically, like in Dungeons and Dragons, magic arises from a couple places, or actually several places, but classically one or two places. Basically, a person has some innate ability, like a congenital from birth ability to manipulate reality in some sort of way. So they have this very inherent magical ability. And those I think in the D&D realm, kind of like sorcerers, you know, that they didn't learn it, they just do it. They know how to do it. The other side are the people who don't have that ability. They sort of really study really hard, study books of incantations, spell books, things like that, just figure out how to manipulate reality through their intelligence. Not that sorcerers don't use intelligence in some way, but the wizards, I think that's the classic dichotomy, is sorcerers have this innate ability, wizards have learned their ability. So in this mythology, these two are kind of combined. So basically there are wizard archetypes, and some of the characters are called wizards, and they're magic using archetypes that are not exactly wizards. They didn't study so much. So everybody that deals with magic has some sort of innate ability, and these are called mage folk. That's in my mind how I call them, and I guess for this that's what they're called. So mage folk can either, you know, have their innate ability, live with that, and that's just how they live their life. They never really advance it beyond what little they can do from birth. And it's very localized, so like maybe they can't create fire out of their hand or ice, or they may be able to, you know, have some sort of projectile that they can shoot out, or it's very limited in power though, and in range. Perhaps they can have some sort of magical shield around them, but it would only be around them, and it would be very weak, or at least relatively weak compared to some other higher forms of magic. The ones that I would refer to as wizards would be people who had that ability and took it and ran with it and really studied, either studied of their own accord, or, you know, it's like the family says, hey, you really need to study this. Sort of like a parallel to like college, kind of. So, you know, it's not necessarily required to function very well in society. Nobody needs college, but it's one of those things where it gives you more tools at your disposal if you do that. So these mage folk really are a service to the kingdom. So they use their abilities to make things easier for people. So a lot of them make a living as being a servant to a family, say, because it's easier for them to make things happen because they can do it magically versus having to expend a lot of physical effort to do things. And this extends all the way up to the throne of Dilate Roeth, and the hierarchy that's in the Knight Army is also, there's a hierarchy in the sort of the mage folk army, I guess. It's not really an army, but once it gets high enough up where you have the actual wizards, then there is this hierarchy where and if times get really dark, then not just the mage folk, but the wizards actually function as part of the army as well, because they can cause all this damage and destruction. And these wizards who have studied this magic, they are not constrained by localized magic. I mean, they still have constraint. They're not unbounded. They can just snap their fingers and the world blows up. It's not like that, but they have much greater power with what they can conjure and the things that they can affect. And their range is greatly increased. I mean, they have many times the power of a non-studied mage folk. And this power is also increased when the mages work together. They can, I guess, cast spells together or work together to affect reality in a way where their power is combined and amplified to affect extremely large areas, which is why, you know, they're called in when times are really bad for protection and for things like that. So the top wizard guy who reports to Beowulf, his position's called the principal wizard, and in the story his name is Vortigern Trygil. And so the story starts, Trygil has his two understudies, so like the next tier down on the hierarchy. One of those two would eventually, once Trygil either passes away or is killed or cease to be, one of those two would become the next principal wizard. So these three actually plot for an unknown reason, it's not revealed, but to overthrow the kingdom so that they can take the throne of Dilate Roeth for themselves. So obviously they're extremely powerful. When you have basically the three most powerful wizards in a kingdom conspire to do something, there's pretty much no one person who's going to stop them. So they end up killing the king, they take the throne, and then some of the things that are unsaid in the story are that they then use their power, and by the time that they've taken the throne, they've gotten a few more tiers of the wizards to kind of come under their rule, because it's sort of like mage folk is a bloodline, so they want to be true to their blood. They have more. It would seem they have more allegiance to the blood than they do to the kingdom. So they have a lot of power, and they use that power to decimate the Knight Army basically in an instant. I mean, not exactly in an instant, but it's very quick. Within probably a few days, they have literally decimated, if not more, the Knight Army of Dilate Roeth. So they spare Daykelm, which it's never said explicitly that they do in our lyrics, but they do, and you don't know why. And it's kind of odd. You would think that would be the first person that they would go after, but they let him go, or he gets away somehow. Basically, there's almost nothing left of the army. I mean, compared to fighting these highly trained, very powerful wizards, there's nothing that can be done. So at least with the army that's there. So Daykelm then takes it upon himself to kind of raise a new army, because he knows that these wizards are very powerful, and they're no longer subservient, or in a frame of mind to be subservient to non-mage folk, and that this is never explained. It's never explained why this all of a sudden turned, and I'm sorry to say I'm not going to explain it right now, because that's kind of the future of where we're going. And this looks like I may have to split this into a two-parter, because this is getting pretty darn long. So I will cut it off at saying this, that these wizards take over the throne of Daileroith. They're basically ruling the kingdom. They haven't stopped anybody from leaving the kingdom that wills it. And many have, because they're afraid of what may happen, because they've seen that just in an instant these wizards just snapped, and nobody knows why or what's going on. It's a very big mystery to the people of the kingdom too. That's kind of why I didn't want to, in the lyrics, explain much at that point, because you're kind of getting the point of view in the story from Dakehelm is the main point of view, but you're also getting the point of view of just like the general populace, what they see going on from the outside, and the intent is to give you the reaction that they would have. It's like, why are these men all of a sudden just succumbing to bloodlust after all these years? And these aren't just young people; these are old men. Obviously, a wizard in this standing is quite old. So it seems very strange why something like this would happen. So Dakehelm tries to band an army together, and things aren't looking good. He gets a lot of common folk who want to help take back the throne, but obviously they're not trained. But he has to use any help he can get. That's where I'll stop this part, and this may be my makeup video, part 2 of this. That way I can fall in line with the same numbering of everybody else's. Yeah, so tune in for my next episode, which will be part 2 of the story of the Wizards' War, and where we're going from there. Yeah, that's pretty much it for right now. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it wasn't too long-winded, and I hope the next one doesn't get too long-winded. But yeah, so we're going to be doing a lot of talking about things that I hope are exciting for you, and if you want to hear anything different or new, or just whatever, you have any feedback, drop me a line at jordan@orderoftyr.com, and you'll be seeing some title cards right after this that kind of show you where you can follow me on the internets, and where you can follow Order of Tyr. Yeah, I will see you guys next time.